I showed up uninvited to Father's Day dinner. Dad commanded, "Don't touch the food. Your sister spent $2,800. My mom added, "This kind of meal isn't for people like you." I just smiled. Turns out, she used my card by mistake from our shared account. I reversed the charge. I left an envelope on Dad's chair. He opened it, and everyone started panicking. I, 29M, had been the family disappointment for as long as I could remember. While my sister built her perfect life as a marketing executive, I chose to be a freelance graphic designer working from my cramped apartment. Dad never let me forget which choice he respected more. The text came 3 days before Father's Day. Mom wrote that they were having a special dinner and I should come, but to dress appropriately. I almost didn't go. These family gatherings usually ended with me feeling like an outsider in my own family, but something made me change my mind. I arrived at Dad's house wearing my best jeans and a button-down shirt. Through the window, I could see the dining room transformed. Crystal glasses caught the light, expensive-looking platters covered the table, and everything screamed money. My stomach dropped when I realized what this meant. Dad opened the door, and his face immediately soured when he saw me. He told me I was late, and everyone was already seated. I followed him inside, noticing how my sister beamed from her spot at the table. She had outdone herself with this setup, and she knew it. Before I could even pull out a chair, Dad's voice cut through the room like a blade. He commanded me not to touch the food, explaining that my sister had spent $2,800 on this meal. The number hit me like a physical blow. $2,800 for one dinner. Mom chimed in from across the table, her voice dripping with that familiar condescension I'd grown up hearing. She added that this kind of meal wasn't for people like me, gesturing vaguely at my clothes. My sister sat there smiling, clearly enjoying every second of my humiliation. I just smiled back. They had no idea what was coming. See, 3 weeks earlier, I'd noticed some unusual charges on my bank account. Large purchases at gourmet food stores, a payment to some high-end catering service, charges at expensive wine shops. At first, I thought my card had been compromised. Then I remembered the shared account Mom and I had set up years ago when she was going through her divorce. She'd needed help with groceries and bills, and I'd added her as an authorized user on one of my credit cards. I'd completely forgotten about that arrangement until I saw those charges. When I called the bank, they confirmed that all the purchases had been made with the card linked to my account, but using Mom's authorized user card. She'd been funding this extravagant Father's Day celebration with my money. The beautiful irony wasn't lost on me. Here they were, telling me I wasn't worthy of food purchased with my own funds. I sat down at the table anyway, ignoring Dad's glare. The meal was admittedly impressive. Wagyu beef, imported cheeses, bottles of wine that probably cost more than my monthly rent. My sister kept talking about how she'd planned every detail, how she'd wanted to give Dad the perfect Father's Day experience. She was practically glowing with pride. Dad launched into one of his speeches about success and responsibility. He talked about how proud he was of my sister, how she'd really made something of herself. Then his eyes found mine, and he started explaining how some people just don't have what it takes to achieve real success. The words stung, but I kept smiling. Mom added her own commentary about maturity and priorities. She wondered aloud when I was going to grow up and get a real job, stop living like a college student. My sister nodded along, occasionally throwing in her own observations about responsibility and adulthood. I listened to it all while mentally calculating exactly how much of my money was sitting on this table. The wine alone had probably cost $600. The beef was another $800 at least. Add in all the sides, the fancy desserts, the imported delicacies, and they'd built their perfect evening on my credit limit. After dinner, Dad retreated to his study as usual. Mom and my sister were in the kitchen, probably planning how to package up the leftovers. This was my moment. I pulled out my phone and opened my banking app. With a few taps, I initiated a chargeback on every single purchase from the past 3 weeks. $2,800 in charges, all reversed. The bank's fraud protection system made it surprisingly easy when I explained that an authorized user had made purchases without my knowledge or consent. Then I took out the envelope I'd prepared. Inside was a printed statement showing all the reversed charges, along with a simple note explaining what I'd done and why. I placed it carefully on Dad's chair where he'd find it when he returned. I didn't stick around to see their reactions. I slipped out the front door and drove home, finally feeling like I could breathe properly for the first time in hours. Update 1. My phone started ringing at 11 p.m. First Dad, then Mom, then my sister. I let them all go to voicemail. The messages were exactly what I expected. Dad's voice was shaking with rage as he demanded I call him back immediately. Mom sounded panicked, asking how I could do this to family. My sister was crying, saying I'd ruined everything. The next morning brought a flood of text messages. Mom had apparently tried to use her card to pay for groceries and been declined. The account was frozen pending the fraud investigation. Dad had called the bank himself, trying to reverse what I'd done, but they'd told him the cardholder had to handle it. My sister's messages were the most interesting. She'd gone from angry to desperate, explaining that she'd already told everyone at work about the amazing dinner she'd thrown for Dad. She begged me to fix this, to make the charges go through again. She offered to pay me back, but we both knew she didn't have that kind of money readily available. I finally answered when Mom called for the 10th time. She was sobbing, asking why I would hurt the family like this. I told her I hadn't hurt anyone. I'd simply reclaimed my own money that had been used without my permission. She insisted it had been a mistake, that she'd forgotten which card she was using. I asked her how someone accidentally spends $2,800. She went quiet. Dad got on the phone and his voice was different than I'd ever heard it. Not angry, but almost pleading. He said the family was more important than money, that I was being petty and vindictive. He asked what it would take to make this right. For the first time in my adult life, my father was asking me what I wanted. Update 2. The bank's investigation moved quickly. Within 48 hours, they'd confirmed that the charges were unauthorized and the reversal would stand. Mom's authorized user privileges were automatically suspended, and they recommended I consider closing the shared account entirely. My sister showed up at my apartment on Tuesday evening. She looked terrible, like she hadn't slept in days. She told me she'd been getting calls from the catering company, the wine shop, even the florist. All the payments had bounced, and they wanted their money. She sat on my couch and finally told me the truth. She'd been struggling financially for months. The perfect life everyone thought she was living was built on credit cards and loans. She'd seen the shared account information when she was helping Mom with some paperwork, and she'd thought she could borrow the money temporarily. She'd planned to pay it back before anyone noticed. The Father's Day dinner had been her desperate attempt to prove she was still successful, still worthy of Dad's pride. She'd wanted one perfect moment where she felt like the golden child again. I asked her why she'd let them humiliate me at dinner if she knew it was my money paying for everything. She started crying and admitted she'd panicked. When Dad started his speech about success and failure, she should have stopped him, but she was terrified of admitting what she'd done. She begged me to help her fix this. The vendors were threatening legal action, and she didn't have the money to pay them back. Her credit was already maxed out, and she couldn't ask Mom and Dad without admitting to everything. I told her I'd think about it. Update 3. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about my sister's breakdown. Despite everything, seeing her that vulnerable reminded me of when we were kids. Before Dad's approval became a competition between us, we'd actually been close. But I also thought about all those years of being made to feel small, all those family gatherings where my choices and my life were dismissed and mocked. The dinner had just been the latest in a long series of humiliations. I called my sister the next morning and told her I'd help, but with conditions. First, she had to tell Mom and Dad exactly what she'd done. No more pretending it was an innocent mistake or my fault for overreacting. She had to own up to using my card without permission and explain her financial situation. Second, she had to apologize to me in front of them. Not a quick sorry, but a real acknowledgement of how she'd let them treat me at that dinner while knowing I was the one who'd paid for everything. Third, she had to pay me back in installments. I'd cover the immediate vendor payments to keep her out of legal trouble, but she owed me every penny plus the overdraft fees the reversals had triggered. She agreed to everything. The family meeting happened that weekend. Watching my sister confess to Dad was almost surreal. His face went through about 5 different expressions before settling on disappointment. Not the explosive anger I'd expected, just deep, profound disappointment. Mom cried through most of it. She kept saying she didn't understand how things had gotten so complicated, how money had become more important than family. When my sister apologized to me, she did it right. She acknowledged that she'd stolen from me, that she'd let them humiliate me with my own money, that she'd been a coward when I needed her to speak up. Dad and Mom just sat there listening. After she finished, Dad looked at me for a long moment. Then he asked if I could forgive them. Not just my sister, but all of them. He admitted that they'd treated me poorly for years, that they'd let their own insecurities about money and success poison how they saw me. He said something I'd been waiting to hear my whole life. He told me he was proud of me for building my own business, for being independent, for standing up for myself when it mattered. I told them I'd already transferred the money to cover the vendor payments. My sister started crying again, but this time it seemed like relief. Final update. 6 months later, family dinners are different. Not perfect, but different. My sister is in therapy and working 2 jobs to pay me back. She's also been much more honest about her struggles, which has actually brought her closer to mom and dad. Dad still sometimes slips into his old patterns of measuring success by salary figures, but he catches himself now. He started asking about my clients and my projects, and he actually seems interested in the answers. Mom closed our shared account and opened her own checking account. She said it was better for everyone if she managed her own finances independently. She was right. The money got paid back over time, but that was never really what mattered. What mattered was that for once, I didn't let them make me feel small. I stood up for myself, and somehow that changed everything. My sister still struggles with money, but she's honest about it now. Dad still values traditional success, but he's learned that there are different ways to measure a person's worth. Mom still worries about appearances, but she's stopped using that worry as a weapon against me. I've started attending family gatherings again, and I actually enjoy them sometimes. Last month, Dad asked me to design a logo for his friend's new business. It wasn't a big project, but he seemed genuinely excited to recommend my work. The best part is that I finally feel like myself around them. I don't shrink into the corner anymore or apologize for my choices. That $2,800 dinner taught me that respect isn't something you can buy, and it's definitely not something you can steal. Sometimes the most expensive lessons are the ones that change everything.